The first time I heard it, I thought someone had left a radio on. It was Christmas Eve, late enough that the families had gone inside, early enough that the street still held a kind of expectant quiet. I was taking the trash out, one of those small evening tasks you save for when guests have left and the house feels too warm, too full of voices. The cold bit in my face the moment I stepped outside, the kind of December cold that makes your sinuses ache. And there was music, not loud, not intrusive, just there, drifting through the space between houses, moving with a wind that stirred the bare branches of the oak trees lining our street. I stood on my front steps longer than I needed to, the empty bins in my hands, trying to place where it was coming from. The sound was rich and a little mournful, something with strings, maybe a cello or violin, though I couldn't be sure. It moved slowly, deliberately, each note given room to settle before the next one followed. The kind of music that didn't demand attention, but rewarded it if you gave it. I walked down to the sidewalk, still holding the bins, and looked toward the corner where Maple intersects with our street. There's a small plaza there. Not really a plaza, just a widening of the sidewalk where the city planted 3 benches and a street lamp years ago. People use it in summer sometimes, mostly teenagers or dog walkers. In winter, it's usually empty. But that night, someone was standing beneath the street lamp. I couldn't see much from where I was, just a figure in dark clothes, the instrument held at an angle I couldn't quite make out in the sodium yellow light. The music continued, unhurried, each phrase rising and falling like breath. I stood there until the cold worked its way through my sweater, then went back inside. Through the window, as I washed dishes, I could still hear it faintly. Not the notes themselves, but the fact of them. The knowledge that someone was out there playing music on Christmas Eve while the rest of us were inside with our leftovers and our families and our tired contentment. My wife came into the kitchen, noticed me standing still with my hands in the soapy water. What is it? Someone's playing music. Outside. She listened, head tilted. Carolers. Just one person. She dried a glass, considering. She said, which was her way of acknowledging something without committing to an opinion about it. Then, did you get the bins back in? I hadn't. By the time I went out again, the music had stopped. The next Christmas Eve, I was ready for it. Not consciously, perhaps. But when evening came and the house settled into its familiar Christmas rhythm, my wife on the couch with her book, our daughter upstairs wrapping last-minute gifts with too much tape, I found myself pulling on my coat without quite deciding to. Going somewhere, my wife asked. Just out for a minute. It's freezing. I'll be quick. She looked at me over her reading glasses. That particular look that said she knew I was being evasive, but would let it pass. Suit yourself. I walked to the corner. The same corner, though I told myself I wasn't specifically going there, wasn't specifically looking for anything. He was there. Same spot beneath the street lamp. Same dark coat. I could see now it was actually navy blue, worn at the elbows. Same instrument, which I could now identify as a cello. The bow moving across the strings with a kind of practiced ease that suggested years of familiarity. He played with his eyes closed, or nearly closed, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something beyond the notes themselves. I wasn't the only one who'd come out. Mrs. Kovac from 2 houses down stood on her porch, arms wrapped around herself despite the thick cardigan she wore. The Reyes family, parents and 3 kids, had paused on their way back from somewhere, shopping bags in hand, watching from a respectful distance. No one approached him. No one spoke. We just stood there, separate and together, while the music filled the space between us and the cold air and the street lamp's amber glow. He played for perhaps 20 minutes, maybe longer. Time did that strange thing it does sometimes, stretching and compressing simultaneously. When he finished, not with a flourish, just letting the last note fade naturally into the night, he opened his eyes, looked at no one in particular, and began packing the cello into its case with the careful, methodical movements of routine. Someone started clapping. The youngest Reyes child, I think. His mother shushed him gently, not unkindly, and the sound died away. The musician didn't acknowledge it. He simply finished packing, picked up the case, and walked away down Maple, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. Mrs. Kovac went back inside. The Reyes family continued home. I stood there a moment longer, then did the same. Was it him again? My wife asked when I came in, stamping snow from my boots. Yes. Did anyone talk to him? No. She nodded slowly, returning to her book. Maybe next year someone will. But no one did. The 3rd year, I noticed the music had changed. Not drastically. He was still playing the cello, still standing in the same spot, still wearing the same navy coat with the worn elbows. But the pieces were different, slower, perhaps, or maybe just more sparse. More space between the notes. More silence allowed to exist. My daughter came with me that year. She was 16 then, old enough to be skeptical of neighborhood oddities, but young enough to still be curious. "Is he any good?" she asked as we walked to the corner. "I think so. I'm not really qualified to judge. Does he play anything recognizable?" "I don't know. I've never been able to place it." "Weird. Maybe." We stood at a distance, closer than I usually stood because my daughter had less patience for hovering on the periphery. Close enough that I could see the musician's face properly for the first time. Late 40s or early 50s, perhaps, with graying hair and the kind of weathered features that suggested time spent outdoors. His eyes stayed closed as he played, his expression neutral, almost absent. "He's really into it," my daughter whispered. Do you think he's homeless?" "I don't think so. But you don't know." "No." She watched him for a while longer, then pulled out her phone. I thought she was going to record him, but she just checked the time. "Mom wants us back by 9. "Okay. Can we stay a bit longer?" "If you want." We stayed until he finished. My daughter didn't say anything else, just watched with the kind of attention she usually reserved for things that genuinely puzzled her. When he packed up and left, she turned to me. "Do you know anything about him?" "No." "Have you ever tried to find out?" "No." "Why not?" I considered the question. It was a fair one. "I'm not sure it matters," I said finally. "Or maybe it matters too much." She looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language, then shrugged. "That's very dad of you." We walked home together, her boots crunching in the snow beside mine. By the 5th year, it had become something people mentioned. Not constantly, not as a defining feature of the neighborhood, but occasionally, in conversations at the grocery store or the community center, someone would say, "Oh, you live on Maple? Near where that man plays music on Christmas Eve?" And the person they were talking to would either nod in recognition or ask for clarification, and then there would be a brief exchange about it, never more than a minute or two, nothing dramatic or profound, just an acknowledgement that this thing existed, that it had been happening long enough to be noteworthy. Mr. Harrison from the end of the block told me he'd started making a point of walking down on Christmas Eve specifically to hear it. "I don't usually go for classical music," he said, "but there's something about it. Can't quite put my finger on it." "I know what you mean. You think he'll keep doing it?" "I don't know. I hope so." "Yeah," Mr. Harrison said. "Me too." That year, someone had placed a folding chair near the street lamp, positioned so the musician could sit while he played. I don't know who put it there. The musician didn't use it. He stood, as always, the cello held between his knees, his bow moving with that same measured, unhurried precision. The chair stayed there for a few days after Christmas, then disappeared. The following Christmas Eve, it was back. He still didn't sit. The 7th year brought snow. Not a blizzard, not even particularly heavy, but steady and thick enough that by evening everything wore a fresh white coat, that muffled sound and softened edges. I wondered if he would come, if the weather would keep him away. He came. More people came too, perhaps drawn by the snow's invitation to step outside, to witness winter in its most presentable form. The corner was more crowded than usual, 10 or 12 people, maybe more, standing in loose clusters. Someone had brought a thermos and was pouring hot chocolate into small cups, passing them around. The steam rose in small clouds, dissipating into the falling snow. The musician played longer that night, or maybe it just felt longer because of the snow, because of the way the cold settled into your bones and made time strange. His coat and hair collected snowflakes that didn't melt immediately, and the cello's dark wood gleamed wetly under the street lamp. A woman I didn't recognize approached him during a pause between pieces. She said something I couldn't hear from where I stood. The musician looked at her, the first time I'd ever seen him make direct eye contact with anyone, and shook his head slowly. Not rudely, not dismissively, just a gentle no. The woman nodded and stepped back, and he continued playing. Later, when my wife asked what the woman had said, I told her I didn't know. "Do you wish you did?" Sometimes, I admitted. Sometimes I think I'd rather not. She considered this. Is it strange that we know so little about him? Maybe, but we know the music. Is that enough? I didn't have an answer for that. By the 10th year, my daughter had graduated college and moved to another city. Our neighborhood had seen 3 families move away and 2 move in, and Mrs. Kovac had died, peacefully, in her sleep, which everyone agreed was a blessing. The musician was still there every Christmas Eve. He looked older now, more noticeably gray, his movements perhaps slightly stiffer when he unpacked the cello and settled it into position. But the music hadn't changed, or, if it had, the changes were too subtle for me to identify. It still had that same quality, mournful without being sad, beautiful without being showy, present without demanding anything. One of the new families asked me about him. Young couple, early 30s, their first house. Do you know his name? The husband asked. No. Where he lives? No. Why he does this? No. The husband laughed, a bit awkwardly. Sorry, I don't mean to pry. It's just unusual, isn't it? In this day and age. I suppose it is. My wife wants to hire him. For a party we're having. I don't think he does that. You've asked him? No, but I don't think he would. The husband looked at me curiously, trying to figure out if I was being deliberately unhelpful or just stating fact. Well, worth a shot, anyway. I never heard if he asked. But the musician kept coming, kept playing, kept leaving without fanfare or explanation. The 14th year was the year Mr. Harrison died. It was in March, sudden, a heart attack while grocery shopping. The neighborhood felt his absence in the way neighborhoods do, that particular quiet that settles in when someone familiar is simply gone. His wife moved away that summer, closer to her sister in Oregon. That Christmas Eve, I thought about Mr. Harrison as I walked to the corner. How he'd always stood in the same spot, hands in his pockets, nodding slightly to the music like he was hearing something the rest of us missed. I wondered if the musician knew, if he'd noticed one familiar face was no longer in the small crowd that gathered. But of course he wouldn't know. He never looked at us, never seemed to register who was there and who wasn't. His eyes stayed closed, his attention turned inward to whatever private landscape the music created. Still, I felt the absence acutely that night. Not just Mr. Harrison's, but all the absences that had accumulated over the years. Mrs. Kovac, the Chun family who moved to California. My daughter, who was spending Christmas with her boyfriend's family for the first time. The various neighbors who'd come once or twice and never again, who'd move away or lost interest or simply forgotten. The music continued regardless, the same as it had always been, which was somehow both comforting and unbearable. The 17th year, someone finally spoke to him. Not during the music. After, as he was packing up the cello with those same careful, practiced movements. A teenager, one of the Robertson kids from Elm Street, I think, approached with the awkward determination of youth. Excuse me, he said. That was really good. The musician paused, looked up briefly, nodded. Do you take requests? A slight shake of the head. Oh, okay. The kid shifted his weight, visibly working up to something. Why do you do this? Play here, I mean. On Christmas Eve. The musician was quiet for a long moment. Then, because I do, right? Sure. I just wondered if. Merry Christmas, the musician said, not unkindly, and picked up the cello case. The kid stepped back, looking both disappointed and relieved. The musician walked away down Maple, same direction as always, his footsteps steady on the packed snow. Later, I saw the Robertson kid talking to his friends, gesturing animatedly. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what he was saying, recounting the exchange, building it into something larger than it was, try to extract meaning from those 3 words, because I do. But maybe that was the only answer there was. Maybe it was even the right one. 20 years. The fact struck me as I walked to the corner that Christmas Eve, my wife beside me this time. 20 years of this strange, quiet tradition. 20 years of music drifting through the neighborhood on the coldest night of the year. 20 years of this man, this stranger, giving us something we never asked for, but had somehow come to need. He looked old now. Not elderly, but unmistakably aged in the way people age when life has worn them down slowly, steadily, like water on stone. His hands trembled slightly as he rosined the bow, and it took him longer than usual to settle the cello into position. But when he played, the tremor disappeared. The music was as clear and true as ever, perhaps even more so. Each note weighted with something I couldn't name, something that felt like accumulated time, like memory made audible. My wife took my hand. She'd never done that before during the music, always stood separate, wrapped in her own thoughts. But that night she reached over and threaded her fingers through mine, and we stood there together while the music built and faded and built again. I'm glad we have this, she said quietly. Me too. Whatever happens, I'm glad we had this. The phrasing caught my attention. Had, not have, but before I could ask what she meant, the music shifted into something that demanded attention, and the moment passed. We stayed until he finished. We stayed while he packed up. We watched him walk away down Maple, same as always, disappearing into the darkness beyond the street lamp's reach. Do you think he'll keep doing this? My wife asked as we walked home. I don't know. I hope so. But nothing lasts forever. No, I agreed. Nothing does. 21 years. It was a mild Christmas Eve, surprisingly warm for December, just cold enough to see your breath, but not cold enough to really feel it in your bones. The kind of night that made you feel like winter had forgotten to show up, like something essential was missing from the season. I walked to the corner at the usual time. Alone, my wife was at her sister's that year. My daughter had called earlier from Denver, where she lived with her husband now, and their infant son, our first grandchild. The street lamp was on. The folding chair was there, still unused after all these years. A small group had already gathered, faces I recognized, some I didn't, all of us drawn by routine and expectation and whatever else brings people out on Christmas Eve to stand in the cold and listen to music they never asked for. I waited. We all waited. 7:30 became 8 o'clock, became 8:30. People shifted their weight, checked their phones, glanced at each other with that particular expression that sits halfway between concern and awkwardness. Maybe he's running late, someone said. Maybe he's sick. Maybe he decided not to come this year. 9 o'clock. The crowd had thinned. People drifting away in ones and twos, going back to their warm houses and their waiting families and their Christmas Eves that would proceed regardless of absent musicians and unheard melodies. I stayed until 9:30. Then I went home. No music tonight? My wife asked when she called later. No. That's strange. Yes. Do you think something happened? I don't know. Will he come back next year? I don't know that either. We talked about other things after that. Her sister's health, our daughter's baby, the year ahead. But the absence sat there underneath everything, this new negative space where sound used to be. 22 years. Or would have been. I went to the corner anyway. Told myself I was just out for a walk, just getting some air, just restless in that way people get on Christmas Eve when the day stretches long and empty between its bookends of morning and midnight. But I went to the corner. A few others had the same idea. We nodded to each other, sheepish in our shared compulsion, our collective inability to accept what absence had already confirmed. We stood there for a while, listening to the nothing where music used to be. The ordinary night sounds, traffic on a main road, 3 blocks over, someone's TV through an open window, wind in the bare trees. Felt both too loud and too quiet, filling space but not occupying it. Maybe next year, someone said. No one answered. We dispersed after 20 minutes, maybe 30. No music, no explanation. Just the cold and the street lamp and the empty space beneath it. 23 years. I went again, of course. Fewer people came this time. Memory is patient, but not infinite, and most had already accepted what I still couldn't quite believe. The corner felt different now. No longer expectant, but simply empty. Just another piece of sidewalk with a street lamp and a folding chair that no one had bothered to remove. I stood there for 10 minutes. 15. Long enough to confirm what I already knew, what I'd known since that first Christmas Eve he didn't come. He wasn't coming back. On my way home, I passed the Robertson kid. Not a kid anymore, a young man now walking his dog. He nodded at me, then paused. You were waiting for him too. Yes. Do you think he died? Maybe. Or moved away. Or just decided to stop. Shouldn't we know? Shouldn't there be a way to find out? I thought about all the years of not knowing, not asking, accepting the music as a gift that required no explanation and therefore no gratitude, no reciprocity, no acknowledgement beyond our presence in the cold. Maybe, I said, but we never asked before, because it didn't matter before, or because it mattered too much. He looked at me, confusion giving way to something like understanding. His dog pulled at the leash, impatient to continue their walk. Merry Christmas, he said. Merry Christmas. I watched him go, then continued home. My wife was in the kitchen when I came in, making tea. She looked up, read my face, said nothing. Just handed me a mug and led me to the couch where we sat together in the kind of comfortable silence that comes from years of knowing when to speak and when not to. Eventually she asked, "What are you thinking about?" I considered the question. What was I thinking about? The musician, obviously. The absence, but also the presence that had preceded it. Those 20 years of music, those 20 Christmas Eves of standing in the cold and listening to something beautiful and inexplicable and utterly free. I'm thinking, I said slowly, about how you can miss something you never owned, how you can grieve someone you never knew, how a tradition can end without ceremony, without explanation, and the world just continues like nothing happened. But something did happen. Yes. For 20 years, something happened. Yes. She sipped her tea. Outside, through the window, I could see our street, quiet and ordinary, decorated modestly for the season, entirely unremarkable except for the fact that it was ours, that we had lived here long enough to see things begin and end, to witness traditions form and dissolve, to understand that permanence is always temporary. Do you think anyone will remember? My wife asked. In 10 years, 20 years. Will anyone remember the man who played music on Christmas Eve? Some of us will. And then we won't. And then it will be like it never happened, except it did happen. We heard it. We were there. She nodded, understanding or accepting or both. We sat there together as evening deepened into night, as Christmas Eve continued its patient march toward Christmas Day, as the house settled into its familiar rhythms around us. Later, much later, I went to the window and looked out at the street. At the corner where Maple intersects with our road, the street lamp cast its amber glow on the empty sidewalk. The folding chair sat there, unused and unremarkable, a small mystery in its own right. Who had placed it there all those years ago? Who would eventually take it away? I thought about the musician, about where he might be now, if anywhere, about why he had come all those years and why he had stopped, about the music that had filled our Christmas Eves with something neither joyful nor sad, but simply true, simply itself, simply there until it wasn't. I thought about absence, how it's not the opposite of presence, but rather its echo, its afterimage, the shape that remains when something is removed. How absence takes up space just as surely as presence does. Maybe more so because we notice it, we feel it, we turn toward the silence, expecting sound. The street stayed quiet. No music tonight. No music next year, probably. No music ever again from that particular man in that particular spot at that particular time. Just the street lamp and the cold and the memory of something that used to be here, something that mattered in ways we never quite articulated and now never would. And somehow, standing there at the window with my reflection ghostly in the glass, I understood that this too was part of it. The not knowing, the not understanding, the having to make peace with absence without explanation or closure or any of the things we think we need to move forward. The music had been a gift. The silence was the price. And both, in their way, were exactly what they needed to be. I stood there a while longer, then turned away from the window and went back to my wife, back to the warm house and the ordinary evening and the Christmas Eve that continued regardless, as all things do. Tomorrow the sun would rise. Tomorrow we would open presents and call our daughter and begin another year. Tomorrow the neighborhood would wake to an ordinary winter morning, and the corner where Maple intersects with our street would be just a corner, just a widening of sidewalk with benches and a street lamp and a folding chair that no one used. But tonight, I let myself remember. Tonight, I stood at the window and listened to the absence where music used to be, and I understood, finally, perhaps too late, perhaps right on time, that this was always how it was going to end. Not with answers, not with understanding, just with the quiet acceptance that some things arrive without explanation and leave the same way, and all we can do is witness them while they're here and remember them when they're gone, and let that be enough. Let be enough. Outside, the street lamp burned on into the night, casting its patient light on the empty corner, waiting for nothing in particular, illuminating no one at all.